All right, thank you for your patience, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. Folks will continue to join in, but we want to be respectful and considerate of your time today. My name is Alex Holland, and I am the Senior Advisor at the Delta Regional Authority, and I will be walking you through the webinar today alongside Kagan Coughlin, who is going to be our guest speaker today, and my colleague Susan Edwards, a program analyst at DRA, will be running our slides. Hopefully everything will go well, but as you all know, over the past year, as we've all had to adopt to technology, things can happen. Please be patient and stick with us. Hopefully we'll have no issues today. So jumping to the next slide. Unfortunately, we don't have Ari here today. He had a new member join his family, so we're very excited for him. Unfortunately, you'll just be stuck with me and Kagan for today. Next slide, Susan. So on the agenda for today, we'll be going through the Department of Labor's Workforce Opportunity for Rural Communities program. We're going to give you a broad overview of what that program is. We're then going to hand it off to Kagan to provide a presentation about the work that he is doing as a result of being awarded a work grant in the first round. And then we're going to jump into the funding opportunity announcement, the FOA. It is a rather lengthy document, about 51 pages. We're going to take a deeper dive into the scoring criteria and help you understand how to develop a competitive proposal so that you know how to submit your application by the deadline. We'll then jump into some Q&A, allow you to ask your questions. If you have really specific questions, I invite you to reach out to us at workforce@dra.gov. We're happy to hop on the phone with you, talk through your projects, and hear a little bit more about the work that you do. And then we'll close out for today. If you have questions in the chat, I'll have Susan monitoring the chat when she can. I will also try to do the same when Kagan's speaking. So we'll try to get to you. If we don't get to you during the presentation, we will save that for the end for Q&A. A couple of acronyms that we need to be familiar with throughout the presentation. DOL is just US Department of Labor. ETA is the Employment and Training Administration, and that is the division that is granting this funding program. FOA, or FOA, is the Funding Opportunity Announcement. Those are the guidelines that we are referring to for this grant program. WORC is Work with a C. That is the grant program's name, Workforce Opportunity for Rural Communities Grant Program. And then SUD, Substance Use Disorder. So if we say these acronyms today, we just want to make sure you know what those are. We will try to speak in full words and phrases, but just a warning there for all of you. So just an overview of the program. So this is the third round of the Workforce Opportunity for Rural Communities program, and it started with the Department of Labor, the Appalachian Regional Commission, and DRA back in 2018 in the Appropriations Act that year. The first round of funding was awarded in 2019. And the whole idea behind this program is to be able to provide more equitable access to rural communities, smaller capacity organizations to apply for Department of Labor funds in what they would call a demonstration grant program. And so what we have done is we have taken some dislocated worker grant funds that are typically awarded and created a new program through WORC. So there's $29.2 million available for this program. The award ceiling is $1.5 million. And the award floor is $150,000. So we've had 2 rounds of work already. This is our 3rd round of work, and we've already been appropriated for a 4th round of work. And I do want to make clear that this is not a DRA grant. DRA is very much involved in the development of the funding opportunity announcement and also serves as review panelists. But this is a Department of Labor program. And so our partnership includes technical assistance, including this webinar. Also, we are hosting 3 regional workshops. 2 of those have already occurred in Arkansas and Mississippi. And this week, on Friday, we will have a workshop in Monroe, Louisiana. So please do join if you are in the region and can get to that workshop. We will go through some of what we're going through today, but it'll be a smaller setting for you to get your questions answered. We also provide post-award technical assistance for those who are successfully awarded a work grant. And so we stick with you through the duration of the period of performance to ensure that you can implement your project in a timely manner, provide those resources to you. And as you can imagine, the past year, it was pretty challenging for people who did not, or grantees who did not have programs who were online or virtual based. But a lot of folks did a great job of pivoting, and we were happy to help along the way. So when you're getting started on applying for a work grant or just considering it, we invite you to visit grants.gov to download all of the application materials. So that's where you're going to find the funding opportunity announcement. You're going to find the mandatory attachments to your application. Please review the FOA fully. It is very, very important. It's also very important to check to make sure that your SAM.gov registration is active or that you are applying through an organization that has an active SAM.gov registration. You can do that if you don't already have your SAM.gov registration done. It does take some time. Sometimes it's between 2 and 3 weeks. Other times it's between 4 and 6 weeks. So if you haven't already done that, I would make sure you do that immediately, as in this week. For the application submission, there is a new guideline this year in that DOL will not accept hard copy submissions. They are due July 21st, no later than 3 p.m. Central Time. I do recommend that you submit your application at least 24 hours in advance. There seem to be issues when everybody is submitting at the last minute or on the same day. They will not accept late applications. So please submit in a timely fashion. If you are following along in the funding opportunity announcement, this will go somewhat in a chronological order. So I invite you to take a look at that funding opportunity as we go through this. One of the first pieces that the FOA opens up with is the funding opportunity description and the program purpose. And the program purpose for the work grant program is to demonstrate the alignment of regionally driven comprehensive approaches to addressing economic distress and the necessary workforce development activities to ensure dislocated and other workers in the regions are capable of succeeding in current and future job opportunities. And essentially what that means is we're not just providing a program that trains workers, but we're also providing all of the resources that they need to successfully gain and remain employed individuals. So that is the program purpose. On the next slide is the program goal. And this is very important to the program this year. This has changed. If you've been following along for each of the work rounds, you've noticed that the FOA has changed slightly each time. Last year, there were 5 or 6 different objectives that were in the FOA. This year, it's one goal, and it's very important that you are able to connect this goal to everything that you do in your application. And that is to create economic prosperity, gainful employment, and high quality career outcomes for workers in impacted ARC and DRA regions, enabling them to remain and thrive in these communities. And that last phrase has been in our goal every single year, because we want to train workers to be able to stay in the Delta region. We don't want to train workers to then have them leave. Some basic award information for the work program. Again, as I mentioned, there's about $29.2 million in the program that will then be split in half equally for the DRA region as well as the ARC region. The awards will range between $150,000 to $1.5 million. It does not matter if your request is smaller or larger or anything in between. So don't want you to focus on that. We tried to make sure that the broad range was still available to folks to choose from depending on their needs. And of course, funding will be provided in the form of a grant. The period of performance for this program is no more than 36 months. So with the anticipated start date being September 30th of this year, 3 years from then will be your end date for this grant program, and that includes everything. All the implementation and startup activities have to occur within that 3-year period. So you have to be ready to go once you're awarded. There are a lot of eligible applicants, a lot of different types of organizations. Of course, your usual suspects with state and local government. We also have special district government, higher education, whether that be public or private, regional development organizations like local development districts, state and local workforce development boards, nonprofits, school districts, et cetera. I do invite you to look at the full list, and that is on page 4 of the FOA. And one thing that Department of Labor is also focusing on this year is being able to leverage unique and innovative and comprehensive partnerships in your communities and regions. And so if you are not an eligible applicant, you can still partner with an organization that is, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what those broad partnerships look like. There are at least 2 employer or industry partners that are required to collaborate or be engaged in the project. In the past, it's been 1 employer. This year, it is at least 2 employer or industry partners. So you can't just have a program with no employers involved in any substantial way. This year, what is also new is that you have to partner with a public workforce system organization, whether that be a state or local workforce development board, an American Job Center, or another related training provider. The map on the screen shows the DRA region, and it is important for applicants to demonstrate that they are serving eligible participants who live in either the DRA or ARC regions. Now, ARC's region is not included on the screen here today. You will have to designate one or the other, even if you're serving individuals that are overlapping in our regions. And there's only so many counties where that occurs, but please keep that in mind. Also, applicants may train for jobs outside of the DRA region, but an applicant must clearly demonstrate that these individuals will be employed within the region, or if it's, say, a trucking company that is hiring, or it's a remote worker, they are obviously very mobile workers. We want to make sure that people can continue to live in their communities, though, and we're not driving people outside of the region. In terms of matching funds, WORC does not require any cost sharing, so there is 0 match required. You don't need to demonstrate this unless you have leveraged resources, and it is encouraged to have leveraged resources. That being said, this is not in the scoring criteria. But for example, if you have a project that is essentially renovating a building or purchasing equipment, you also have to show how you're facilitating that workforce development program. So maybe you have some other providers that are either providing the training, maybe they're assisting with tuition, perhaps employers are paying folks to work and learn on the job. Being able to show those leveraged resources in your budget narrative, and only in your budget narrative, will be important. You don't need to include that anywhere else. And we'll talk a little more about that later today. But resources contributed beyond what the agency or Department of Labor would be funding are just considered leveraged resources. To be eligible, please submit only one application from your organization. Only one will be considered. If you were to submit multiple, they would only review the latest application that was submitted. You can, however, be included as a partner on other applications. So just wanted to throw that out there so you are aware. These are the types of participants that can be included. And frankly, if you're to look at the definitions, you can serve nearly anybody in this program. So while I mentioned previously that this program was essentially taken out of the dislocated worker grant program, it is a demonstration grant to go above and beyond just dislocated workers. So that includes new entrants to the workforce, which are individuals who have never worked before or have been out of the workforce long enough to make it as if they are entering the workforce for the first time. One example of that, other than maybe a new high school graduate, is somebody who was previously incarcerated. Dislocated workers as well, individuals who were terminated or laid off or have received a notice of termination or layoff from employment, or those who are self-employed but now unemployed. And then incumbent workers, so individuals who are currently employed and need training to secure full-time employment, advance in their careers, or retain their current positions. We are going to go through these in detail, but these are all of the eligible activities. So as I mentioned, this program seeks to fund projects that are pretty holistic and addressing all of the workforce development needs of individuals. So everything from training and work-based learning models to other employment-related services, innovative service delivery strategies, participant support services, as well as employer support services, and the purchasing of equipment and making renovations are all eligible under this program. And again, I'm going to go through each of these in detail right now and give you some examples from other grantees in the past that have done this. So for the first one, this is probably the easiest to explain, but of course, an eligible activity is training and work-based learning models. And so that includes everything from traditional classroom training to other work-based learning models, such as registered apprenticeships or other types of apprenticeships, customized training programs that you might do for employers to meet some of their workforce needs. That could include workers that are already in the workforce, but maybe need some additional certifications in order to advance. On the job training, other types of work experiences are also eligible under this activity. And the example that we have today is from North Shore Technical Community College down in the New Orleans area. Greater New Orleans, Inc., which is an economic development organization in the New Orleans area, helped seed this mechatronics apprenticeship program. It has 3 community colleges as well as several employers to help train folks for advanced manufacturing positions. And so they have a really unique partnership where they've got 8 weeks of classroom training at one of the community colleges. Then they go 8 weeks to work with one of the, or their chosen employer. They go back to traditional classroom training at the next community college, back to the employer, and that continues to go on through a 2-year period. So it is an apprenticeship program. They are paid to go through this program, and they were really able to scale that at a broader level to not only meet the needs of the one employer who really felt that they needed this type of training, but they were able to do the outreach to several employers in the area so that they were able to create a program that is highly customizable to all of the advanced manufacturing companies in that area that needed workers. And another eligible activity is other employment related activities. So this might be soft skills development, for an example, employability training, such as punctuality, personal maintenance, and professional conduct. It might also include providing assessments and evaluations of individuals, especially identifying any sort of barriers that might prevent them from attaining and also sustaining long-term high quality employment, as well as career planning. So that might be for people who are new to the workplace. It might be for folks who have been out of the workplace for a long time and looking to sustain that employment. And so we have a couple of previous work project examples. One is Arkansas Northeastern College through their program. They provide pretty significant wraparound services in the form of peer coaches. They provide some counseling and mentoring because a lot of the folks that they're working with are either impoverished, they are recently incarcerated, and so they provide some case management as well. ULM, the University of Louisiana at Monroe, is also providing a high school business academy. And so they're meeting the needs of younger participants who are new to the workforce. And they teach students the basics of entrepreneurship, management, marketing, and accounting. And also for those college-bound students, they allow them to earn 18 hours of college credit through the program. And so as you can see, for other employment-related activities, you can look at it a couple of different ways with how you can meet the needs of individuals in your communities. Innovative service delivery strategies is another eligible activity. So this might be to help overcome existing challenges that exist in the region. One example of this might be broadband. And you can take a look at the page 8 in the FOA if you want to see a lot of the examples that they provide, and a lot of the examples say might include but are not limited to, so you can get a better idea of what that includes. But that also might be the application of new business models, products, services, technology, or capital improvements or equipment purchases that you might make for your program. A couple of examples from previous grantees. The University of West Alabama, through their Links program, is providing customized training for employers in the area. They actually have a mobile training unit that allows them to go out into the more rural areas of the region that they're serving. And they are also developing employer-driven curriculum and fast-track certificate programs. And lastly, they were also able to establish the Center for Rural Apprenticeships at the university to be able to, again, meet the needs of the broader region beyond those in UWA's community. And then Mantricon in Illinois is actually using virtual reality to provide training for their aviation technician program. And so the past year, that's obviously been really helpful with everything going on with the pandemic. And so they were able to provide training throughout the pandemic, regardless of in-classroom training not being able to occur during parts of last year. Another eligible activity is participant support services. And so this might be activities or resources that enable individuals to participate in the training that you are providing. So it might be assistance with childcare. It might be assistance with transportation. It could also be in the form of stipends and wages or any other incentives that might help participants participate. And that's especially for maybe underserved individuals who otherwise wouldn't be able to be trained for a job. It might also be supplies, purchasing supplies, whether it be books or training materials for the individual going through the program. And there are a few examples from 2019 and 2020 that we'll go through here in a minute. So we have two universities in Louisiana that are both doing nursing programs. The first at Southeastern, they were able to provide stipends for their trainees. They were also able to pay for their training supplies and also testing costs for their certifications. And similarly, McNeese, with their RN to BSN program, has also provided student tuition scholarships, again, so individuals that might have barriers to participating in these types of programs can. They also provided hotspots so that they could do their training from wherever they are and hopefully have some stable internet. One of the last eligible activities is employer support services. As I mentioned previously, it is very, very important that employers and industry partners are engaged in your projects. That's not only demonstrated through your letters of commitment or engagement, it's also shown by the services that you're providing to them, especially for small and medium-sized employers. Perhaps a business only needs a handful of trained workers, but like the GNO example, being able to find other employers in the area that might have similar workforce needs and collaborating with each other to create a program would fall under this eligible activity. And also considering what role can these employers and industry partners play other than benefiting from the trained individuals? Can they help inspire the curriculum that is developed? Can they provide any sort of mentorship services? Can they provide some on the job training? So getting really creative with how we incorporate our employers in this program is important. And an example from 2019 is Madisonville's Community College's program, where they saw a need not only for a CDL training program, but also that linemen were needing this. So both trucking companies and utility companies needed this type of program. And so they've been able to jointly create with another community college and deliver a 4-week CDL training course, again, to meet the needs of 2 different types of industries who could equally benefit from this type of training. Lastly, purchasing equipment and making renovations. And this is what makes this program really unique, in that most programs provided by the Department of Labor do not fund renovations or any sort of significant capital improvements. And so this means improvements to buildings or equipment, and that might be retrofitting a facility so that you can then facilitate workforce training, again, meeting the needs of area employers. You can also lease space for training and education-related activities, but it's very important to note that no new construction is allowed. We have had in the past, if you are adding on to an existing building, that has been approved in the past, but everything will require grant officer approval prior to you beginning. So even if you're awarded the grant, you will still need to get that prior written approval from a grant officer. And the example that we have today that I'm not going to talk about, because I'm going to have Kagan talk about this, is Basecamp Coding Academy and what they were able to do when they moved into their new building, Everest, which is the first rural education and innovation hub in Mississippi. They renovated a dilapidated garment factory in the community. So I'm really excited for you to hear from Kagan. And I will hand it off to him.
Good morning, everyone. I'm not sure if I can get verification that everyone can hear me, so I'm just going to keep going unless someone raises their hand. Oh, perfect. Thank you, Nicole. So I'm here today to talk about Basecamp Coding Academy, which is our workforce development program in Water Valley, Mississippi. This was a program that we started in 2016 here in our little community of 3,400. And the concept behind it was twofold. One, we are in rural America, and I and several of my colleagues work in the technology sector, and we spend the majority of our time searching for new talent and new hires. And I'm actually a prime example of the solution that most companies have to turn to when they can't find local talent, which is relocating folks from somewhere else and bringing them into our smaller communities in the heartland. So I relocated with my wife to Mississippi in 2006 from Washington, DC. And from that time forward, more time than I liked was spent facing the same challenge of finding someone with the technical skills who was in my region, and if not, paying a significant amount to find that talent, relocate that talent, and then fight the ever-losing battle of retaining that talent for more than a couple of years. So that was one half of the challenge that kind of sparked the idea for Basecamp. The second part was anybody who lives in a small town, you know lots of bright young folks that are going through your school systems with limited opportunities after they graduate. Hopefully they get to the graduation mark, but beyond that point, if they don't have someone in their social or family sphere to help guide them, they are unlikely to find a path to higher education or even apprenticeship programs that will lead to a career. And my wife and I, having lived in this town for a dozen years and met and grown attached to many of the young folks here who we would know through high school, lose track of them for a couple of years, and find them to have started a family oftentimes before they had established any sort of economic footing. And that would make every step that followed that much more difficult. So a few of us were talking about these challenges. And even though we're all from the private sector, we don't have any personal background in education beyond our, whatever personal education we received. We thought, why don't we, as the private sector businesses who are looking essentially to consume the product of training programs, why don't we see if we can develop one ourselves? And that was the spark of the idea. And we did that. We formed a 501c3. We gathered a group of us who enjoyed working together professionally, and we designed really a pilot program where we could test a concept. Could we take a young person out of the public schools in America who, particularly in Mississippi, would not have any prior exposure to software development or coding, and how quickly could we get them to a market-ready value-add employee, and then what dollar figure? So we ran around the state banging on doors to raise funds to give this, essentially this, oh, I'm sorry, my audio just cut out, to give this pilot program the opportunity to have all of us learn what our students were capable of and what our program could be capable of. And we raised $500,000 from 9 different entities to give this idea a try. And that $500,000 was a sufficient amount of funds to operate the Coding Academy for 3 years. And there were several reasons why we approached the financials that way. One, we wanted the time to stress test everything we were doing. And we did not want to have to worry that we were producing, a finished product, that we had hit everything exactly right our first time around. And we didn't want to have to worry about losing funding while we were still learning. And the second approach, the reason why we worked until we had that many funding sources, is we didn't want to have our students or anyone who was partnering with us feel like our students were beholden to a specific employer. We wanted everyone to have an equal share of a sense of ownership of what was happening and what we were testing, and have all those companies who came both financially and with the enterprising spirit of entertaining changing their hiring practices. Every company that has hired a graduate from our program has had to change their HR policy for software development new hires. Traditionally, and even today, most places require a 4-year computer science degree. So the companies that were willing to participate in our pilot program had to both buy in economically, but also they had to address a huge culture challenge inside their companies. So that was the idea. That is where we started. And we ran the program for 3 successful years with pretty small classes. We worked with regional high schools to find an adult who had a relationship with a prospective student. Because one of the big challenges was, where do you source a promising candidate who is, in the age range that we're targeting? We go into high schools and we identify a rising senior who does not have any substantial prospects after graduation. We are not looking as a program to compete with any current systems that are out there. There are lots of excellent systems that have been developed over the last century, but there are still a lot of cracks, and we were hoping to be an addition to the community of educators. So we went to the school. Oftentimes it would take 4 visits, starting with the superintendent, who would give us permission to meet with the administrators, who would give us permission to meet with the teachers, talking about the opportunity in this particular skill sector for their students, and asking them to help us identify strong candidates who were, on the scale of requirements we have, there's an area of intelligence and aptitude, and then there's honestly the more critical area of maturity and work ethic. Because what we've found, what we thought at the beginning, and we've certainly learned to be true, is to take a young person who has had zero exposure to the technology space and take them from wherever they are to a competitive software developer in 12 months. It is a huge amount of work on the part of that young person. And the way that we structured our program requires 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week for 11 and a half months. It's 2,000 hours of learning and practicing and repeating and exercising that skill so that they can go into the marketplace and not receive a job opportunity or a career opportunity based on anything but their merit. Something that we were very clear with every company that we talked to at the outset and then since is we operate as a nonprofit. All of our students receive a full scholarship to pay for every cost of the program, but that charity ends the moment they graduate. And any company that hires a student coming out of our program needs to be receiving value for the salary they are paying. Otherwise, we haven't achieved the goal that we set out. So with all of those things rattling in our head, we designed a curriculum with lots of input from all of those companies that were looking to help both with funding the program, but also with hiring the graduates from the program. And with the assistance of that community of schools, from teachers to counselors to coaches to administrators to librarians, helping us identify prospective candidates, we started our program and we successfully graduated 3 classes. The first in 2017 and then 2018. I think we have pictures of 19, there we go, and 20. And we tracked every single metric that we could about how things were going, both how the students were progressing through the content and their skill growth, their ability to integrate with a business environment, because they leave us when they're on average 19 and they are going into professional office environments where they're at minimum 3 years younger than everybody else. And then the most critical thing as an organization was the reception they were receiving from their employers. And we looked at our students as they entered the workforce as a product, and we would meet with every hiring manager and every HR department and every technical manager inside a company that had one or more of our alumni, and essentially do a gap analysis and ask them, where did we hit the mark? How could we improve on future generations of graduates from our program? And we have those meetings with our corporate partners as often as they allow us to, both because it really helps us learn. And so a fine example is our first year graduates went out into the workforce, and some went to FedEx and some went to CoreLogic and some went to C-Spire. And we heard back from everyone that the students, no longer students, our graduates, were missing meetings. And we realized that we had not exposed them to Microsoft Outlook, and they didn't really know what a meeting invite was, or what it looked like, or where their calendar was. A very easy thing to remedy, and a crucial skill for someone who's entering an office environment. So little things like that are hugely valuable to us, but it also keeps all of our corporate partners engaged, and they feel like they have a known quantity coming into their environment, both from a business perspective and a culture perspective. And it has been really wonderful to see the integration with our students from the private sector, both while they're students and then immediately following through the hiring process and as they start their careers. If we move to the next slide, please. So this is kind of a snapshot of what Basecamp has turned into, from the 6 of us who are on the board of Basecamp and spend a large amount of time caretaking this program. But the number of people and entities that make Basecamp a success, I can't speak highly enough of everyone on this slide. So on the left, those are the schools that we are sourcing today students from. And we work with any school within a 50-mile radius of our geographic location so that the students can reasonably commute to class every day. Part of our cost that we cover for the students is whatever it costs for them to commute. And the 50-mile distance it's a loose measure. We have a couple of students that are a little bit over that line, but it's a stretch at that 50 miles for them to put in a hard 8-hour workday and commute. And many of our students also have jobs to support themselves. The student population that we work with is in a socioeconomic strata that is challenging. And even though Basecamp does not cost them anything except their time and dedication, life is still challenging. And one of the reasons why we are so narrowly focused today as a program at students who are immediately coming out of high school is because we recognize the challenge of life debt, and life debt starts accruing so quickly. And if we can essentially cheat and get to a young person before they have those other responsibilities that make everything so much more challenging, they get to start their career in the most opportune way and time that they can. So on the left-hand side, those are all the schools where there is someone in that institution that is helping us identify prospective students. Our staff, this under instructors, we have 3 full-time folks that work here, and they spend all day, every day with our students. John Terenzio is a 100% volunteer software developer who moved to town, and he donates several hours a week to come in and work across the spectrum. So what's fun is he was one of the founding software developers for Airbnb. So he can sit with our high performers and challenge them all day long, but he also has a long career trajectory that he can help coach all of our students as they start their own career searches in the 3rd quarter of our program. Northwest Community College, it's a small acronym there, but they've been a huge partner from the moment we started Basecamp. They allowed us to work under the umbrella of Northwest. In the first several years, our students were all on the roles of their workforce development. And while in the short term, because our students are leaving us and going straight into a full-time position with generally a corporate employer, that workforce development transcript was not something that we had sought out. The fact that Northwest lent us their reputation so that when we went into some of our smaller communities as a brand new organization talking about a career opportunity that very few of the folks we were engaging with had any understanding of what software development was, being able to work in partnership with such an established entity that is so well respected The community college network in Mississippi has, I've only lived in a few states, but it has the strongest reputation of an education pathway of any community college organization that I've ever been aware of. I think that their engagement with other areas of workforce development, so in manufacturing spaces and agriculture, have been one of the lifelines for the whole state. So having them share that with us really helped, honestly, with parents and grandparents whose young folks were thinking about coming into base camp. And it helped for the first few years, certainly, to allow our students to take that leap of faith with a new organization. And on the right, the employers, I have them labeled employers here, but really we talk about them as our customers. So they are essentially buying into the whole concept and employing our graduates. So we look at them as the folks that need to be our guiding light in terms of what our students are capable of when they leave our program. And we engage them in every possible way, both economically, because they pay our bills, but also we bring them into the program and introduce our students to them here. And all of these companies allow us to take field trips to their campuses, both their corporate campuses or wherever they are, to expose our students to everything that their future career might have, so that by the time they leave us, there are no surprises and the nerves, to the best of our ability, have been quieted. And one thing that, these groups have done amazing things for us, but one standout is every spring our students leave our classrooms and spend a 40-hour work week in an office somewhere. And they get their security badges and they get lost and they have to ask where the restrooms are. I saw that question, Jacqueline, I'll answer that in just a moment. And that was an idea that they brought to us after meeting our students. And they said, there are a lot of things that a new hire who has already started their career does not have to go through because they experienced that somewhere else. We would love to give your students that opportunity. And that opportunity isn't just being a host. In many cases, that has required our students to stay in a hotel somewhere so that they can be near the office for that full 40-hour work week. And that's something that these companies they footed the bill for that component of the program as well. So I can't say enough wonderful things about them. In terms of housing, today we do not offer a housing solution. That's one of the reasons why we are geographically focused on a 50-mile radius of our location, and we fund the cost of commuting. We talk about housing all the time because transportation and housing is one of the biggest challenges for our students. And so that's something that we continue to look into, but right now our solution is having the students live wherever they are living when they're in high school and commuting to us, and we cover that cost. Next slide, please. Oh, this is our board. All of these were all current or former executives in the technology sector. And I can't tell you enough about how much time each of these folks contributes along with their personal economic contributions to Basecamp. Next slide, please. Okay, so we had been in flight for 2.5 years. We were about to honestly run out of money from our pilot. And we were recruiting for our 4th year. And we went out to every one of those companies and asked them what they would like. Were they interested in seeing this type of venue continue and be an ongoing source of new employees into the future? And the answer from everybody was yes and more, please. Which made us go home and start thinking about how do we scale up this program in an economically responsible way so we can continue to reach the students that we have been trying to reach and continue to not have an economic burden on our students. And while we were noodling on this, Northwest Mississippi Community College came to us, and we shared that we were looking for a location that would allow us to expand and that was ADA accessible and all the things that our original location, which was the second floor of a historic building in our little town, was not conducive to. And Northwest asked us if we were looking, could we try to find a place that would be large enough for them to join us. So Northwest has an 11 county footprint, which is, it's just huge. And historically, they have never had a physical location in our county, which is Yalobusha County. So the fact that they were willing to start staffing and operating programs in our county, if we could find a location for them, was hugely exciting, just as a resident of the county, let alone as someone involved with Basecamp. So it changed the scope of what we were thinking about. And there was one facility that was large enough in our community for a project like that. And there she is. It was a former garment factory that had been empty since the early 90s. And it was both large enough for Basecamp, Basecamp's future growth, and a satellite campus for Northwest, as well as providing space for all those companies that currently hire our graduates to have office space with us under the same roof and have their staff available to our students while they were passing through the education process and potentially go to work for those companies without having to relocate out of our small town. So if you see the top of this picture, that is Water Valley, and this structure, which was empty and honestly largely open to the elements, you could fit most of the town inside this building. And there was a reason why it had sat vacant for 30 years. But we put on our brainstorming hats and started looking at how could we create a full-scale education facility in a community of our size that honestly didn't have funds to do any of this. And if we go to the next slide. And what we came up with was a large budget with essentially $650,000 raised from our corporate partners who had helped us all through the pilot period. But that was a long way. That was $4 million shy of what we needed. And we have an amazing board who all in their personal professional experience has all sorts of ideas and experience. And we brought everything we could possibly think of and threw it at the wall to see what would stick. And at the end of the day, we were able to glue together the grant programs from ultimately 5 different federal agencies and also 5 different tax credit programs to make up the difference of that $4 million plus. And in the spring of 2019, we had collectively reached the $4 million mark. And we were $635,000 shy when we heard the first announcement about the Department of Labor WORC grant program. And so I think if we go to the next slide, this gives you an outline of our corporate partner participation. And so we applied for the WORC grant in 2019 as the linchpin that would bring this whole thing together. Without this grant program, we would not have been able to move forward at all. It was really a house of cards that if any one piece had fallen apart, there was nothing else to make it up. We had exercised every opportunity and option that we had. And what we did with the WORC grant is we were able to start our application by saying we are not looking for operating funds because we have these corporate partners who have committed to paying for the operations of Basecamp into the future. What we don't have is a location to house both our program and the programs that Northwest Mississippi Community College could bring to our community. So if we go to the next slide. And the combined goals of Basecamp Coding Academy and Northwest Mississippi Community College, we were able to outline them here. And the first three categories here, which are coding and technology related, those three categories are what Basecamp Coding Academy is working to achieve in this new facility. And the rest of it is what our community college partner is bringing into this community for the first time. Next slide, please. So this is where we were. The grant opened. We wrote that grant application, and by we, I mean me, a person who has no history or experience writing grants, but I spent a huge amount of time reading and rereading the instructions for this particular grant and getting friends and colleagues and my wife to proofread for me as I went. And the short of the story is that that grant was approved, and in January of 2020, we broke ground on this facility, and I'm sitting in it right now we have almost 50 Basecamp students in session right now, and the community college has started almost every program that we saw on that previous slide. But if we move forward again. So what I wanted to do quickly, I'm sure that many folks on this call have more experience in this space than I do. Basecamp is the only nonprofit that I've ever been involved with at a founding level. And this particular project is the only thing I've ever written grants for. So I'm just going to give you a quick layperson breakdown of what the WRC grant application process was like for me and a few little tips. So if you've ever completed a grant, the first two there are federal forms. Actually, if we go to the next slide, I think I get a little more specific. There we go. So the first two are just federal forms. If you haven't completed a grant application, there are some unique identifiers that you need from federal websites, and then DUNS, which is not a federal website. But those I would just schedule some time to register with those places and make sure that you have those unique identifiers. But the first and the second, those two forms are simple and straightforward. It's just knowing information about yourself as an organization. The letters of engagement, Alex talked a little bit about the partners that you need to have, essentially showing that you're not working alone, because the success of any program like what we have here with Basecamp relies so heavily on a support network. And so we went, I think, a little above the base requirements by getting letters from anyone, all of our corporate partners, from the community college. We banged on every door locally to get letters from community leaders. And then I happened to know and be able to pester many of our elected officials at the state level and at the federal level. So we did that to find anyone who could and should write us a letter of recommendation, or simply saying, we understand the mission and we would love to see this be a success in our region. The application region is just a geographic outline of where you will be operating. The key staff resumes, this is pretty straightforward. It's essentially who is going to be managing the program and managing the funds. Another stopgap method for any federal agency that's handing out taxpayer dollars, to make sure that they're handing them to folks that will manage them properly. And the financial system is more of that. It's simply documenting the processes that you have in place to manage funds, so that you will be able to report when you need to how the funds were used. So this, if I were to categorize all of those areas, there's a fair amount of it, but it's busy work. It's collecting information. A little piece of advice: no matter how well you know someone and how close you think you are, budget time to get those letters of engagement out of folks. I was definitely making calls on Sunday nights to get folks to actually put them in my hands. But for the most part, this is simply time and effort. And this is a space where you can really bring in, if you have someone who can help you with the busy work, this is that area. The next slide. So the project narrative, this is the core. This is what differentiates your application from everybody else. And this is where you have the opportunity to explain what you're doing, why you're doing it. And the biggest challenge I found here was the space restriction. So you get 10 pages and the instructions that outline everything you need to include in those 10 pages are far longer than 10 pages. And that means that the thing that you were passionate about, if you are writing one of these grant applications and you know intimately, there's a lot to your story and what you're doing and why you're doing it and the history of your community, why it needs the program that you're putting together. And it's really hard to carve that down to have it still be compelling to someone who's reviewing a grant without you getting to watch their face for reactions and make sure that they actually understand your story. But this was where I spent the majority of my time and where I asked for the most input from extra sets of eyes to make sure that I wasn't assuming knowledge on the part of the reader who would not have it. The opportunity zones there under A, part 5, that I don't believe is included in this grant application any longer. If you're familiar with the opportunity zones, they were asking 2 years ago about those, and they no longer do. We were not in an opportunity zone. The outcomes, outputs, and sustainability. The one thing here, outcomes and outputs are easy to flip-flop. The outcomes are that slide that I showed previously that had the specific folks that will be trained in a specific trade. That is as granular as you can get. With this grant, we will touch this many people in these ways. The outputs are the more holistic impacts that your program has. So the economic impacts to your community, the partnership potential and the growth of business in your area. Those types of things are meant to stay in the outputs category, but it's very easy to lose track of that and you get a very small amount of space to answer both of those areas. The project description, again, it's outlining how you're going to achieve your goals. And the biggest challenge here is doing it in a concise way that still lets someone you've never met who's reading this for the first time understand what your strategy is and why it will be successful. And the last couple parts are, it's laying out your team, what you did more granularly in the first area. This is where you can share in a narrative fashion your team who will be leading this and their capabilities and why they should be entrusted with these funds to continue this mission. All right, next slide. And then these are the last 3 components, and they're pulling out from that project narrative. If your project narrative is concise in those 10 pages, these are simply components of that. But my understanding is when your application is received by the Department of Labor and DRA, the review teams are taking parts of that application to review. A few folks, I know the folks at DRA definitely read the whole application, but a lot of the folks at the Department of Labor are looking at components. So that abstract is essentially taking your project narrative and cutting 10 pages down to a compelling half page. And making sure, again, if you haven't access to an extra set of eyes and have them read without you watching them and see if they actually understand the message that you're trying to convey, because you won't get any opportunity to circle back with whoever's reviewing this application. And then the last little thing, grants.gov. I hope nobody's on this call that is responsible for managing that site. It is It is an easily overloaded site. So if you can get your grant application uploaded before the day of the deadline, and hopefully it's not a deadline for a different grant cycle, that website freezes or stops the upload of things as you're uploading your giant package, and you don't know if the components went, and sometimes half of it will upload and it will look like it went up. So I would highly recommend getting to that site ahead of time and having time to call customer support if you need to, if there's through your process. I believe that was the end of my presentation time.
Thank you so much, Kagan. I didn't think you needed any introduction. It's always so helpful to hear your presentation, even though I think I maybe have heard it 8, 9, 10 times now, but even I learned something new. And as that program develops at Everest, just really excited about all of the success you've had. If you have any questions for Kagan, or as we continue to move forward in the on the work funding opportunity announcement, please drop those in the Q&A section. We will get to your questions, but thanks again, Kagan, for joining us today. So this is the last part of the webinar. Thank you for hanging with us. This is the most important part of the webinar as well, because we are going to walk through what you need to do to develop a competitive proposal. So we are going to start with the application screening criteria. And this is the criteria that the Department of Labor will look at to see if your application moves on to the review process. That being said, if you don't have all of these pieces, your application will not be reviewed. That has happened in or at least the first 2 rounds of work that we have had. It is, I have heard about it from individuals and organizations that I know probably submitted a solid application, or the project was great and would have been very impactful if funded. So please, please, please review the application screening criteria before you submit. As a reminder, the application package is due July 21st, no later than 3 p.m. Central Time. That being said, like Kagan mentioned, grants.gov is a nice website that probably needs improvements and is overloaded very, very easily. So please submit your grant package earlier rather than later, so you have no issues. And if you do have issues, you have plenty of time to contact support. You absolutely have to be an eligible organization. Again, that list is in the funding opportunity as well on page 4. The application package that you submit cannot be corrupted in any way, and there is format specifications that are included in the FOA, including the titles of certain files. Please pay attention to those as well, so that you are not, again, being thrown out of the process for those little mistakes. The project narrative that Kagan was mentioning, as he said, is limited to 10 double-spaced, single-sided, 8.5 by 11-inch pages. You have to use Times New Roman font in 12-point font and 1-inch margins. It is very specific. DRA did not make these rules, but this is what we have to do. This does level the playing field for everybody, which is why they have those specifications. That is on page 17 in the FOA. If you forget to please reference that. Your funding request has to be within the funding range between 150,000 to 1.5 million. Anything above and beyond that, again, would disqualify you. You must have an active registration on sam.gov. The 2 mandatory forms need to be filled out, that SF424 as well as the SF424A need to be attached to your application. You need to have your budget narrative and your project narrative And then lastly, your designation either in the ARC or DRA region with the service area map. So again, you do need to submit that as a separate attachment to the application. So please be aware of that. It has to be one or the other region, even if you're serving both. As a reminder, these are the eligible participants. Since we already reviewed those, I'm not going to go through that again, but again, pretty broad: new entrants, dislocated workers, as well as incumbent workers. Make sure you mention either one, two, or all three of these types of participants that will be participating in your program. It's really important for the evaluators to see those specific phrases in the application. And lastly, as a reminder for eligible activities, while we went through all of these in detail, make sure you are providing a project narrative that describes one or more of these eligible activities. You don't have to address every single one. You just have to address at least one, but please make sure that you are writing and framing your project accordingly. The project narrative, if you would like to follow along in the FOA, I'm on page 17 using the FOA as a reference. This piece of the FOA is quite dense. And as Kagan mentioned, it is very difficult to write a factual and compelling project narrative within the constraints that you have, which is those 10 pages. You have to be very concise, and you have to write your proposal according to what is in the scoring criteria, which is why we're focusing on that today. So within your project narrative, these are the 5 main components that are going to be evaluated, and then we'll go into detail for all of these. Your statement of need and strategic alignment. Basically, why does your community need this type of investment for this type of program, and how are you aligned with strategic plans in your community, in your region? Secondly, the project description. This is the heart of the project narrative because you will be describing your program and how it will be implemented, the partners that you have, the design of your project. So it is worth 30 points. Expected project results and sustainability. Fortunately, this year, while you'll see the Department of Labor really values expected results and project sustainability, you won't have to break these out into outcomes and outputs. Like Kagan mentioned, it's very easy to confuse those. There are some specific requirements that we'll discuss for this section, but it's going to be a bit broader and more open-ended according to each applicant's proposal. The fourth is organizational, administrative, and fiscal capacity. That will be 10 points. And then lastly, the budget and budget narrative. The budget will be submitted in the SF 424A form. And the budget narrative will then detail all of the line items that are included in your budget. All of that will need to match up for those 12 points. So for our statement of need, these are the 5 key areas that make up the 18 points that the Department of Labor has assigned to this section. The first is the description of the community and your needs. So this goes beyond just looking at the demographics of your community. We also need to identify some labor market information such as unemployment rate. Are you designated in a persistent poverty county or parish, for example? Describing some of the demographic data doesn't have to be every piece of data you can find about the region you're trying to serve. But what is it that is going to show the person evaluating your application that your community needs this program for what? Okay, so we also need to describe the types of individuals we'll be serving. For those of you who are going to include or emphasize serving individuals impacted by substance use disorder, there are certain requirements for that. Some applicants I've seen in the past will just say that they're going to serve that population in an effort to make their application more compelling. It's not unless you thoroughly include that in the project design, so please consider that. What is new this year is the demonstration of inclusion of energy communities. This replaced the opportunity zone points, so that's no longer in the scoring criteria. And while this is not a requirement, if you are working in a region that is considered an energy community, which was described on page 18, you would need to demonstrate that in your statement of need as well to describe the needs of your community. The description of workforce needs will be including the skills gap that you are trying to close, the employers that might need to be served, but also mentioning your industries of focus. Is there a workforce need? Can you demonstrate that in your statement of need? How does that tell your story around why this project is necessary? Like I mentioned before, your target population is going to include those eligible participants. If you are focusing on SUD impacted individuals, how your project is going to impact them in any way. And then lastly, it's alignment with strategic plans. And there are 3 strategic plans that you will need to align with to get all 3 points. I would recommend not focusing a ton of your energy on describing how your project aligns with the strategic plans. And I say that with the caveat that you just need to be very concise here. For example, in the DRA federal plan, which you do need to align with, improved workforce competitiveness is one of the goals, one of 3 goals. I'd imagine that most, if not all, applications will use that goal. So it's pretty easy to wrap that goal with any goals that are included in your DRA state plan as well. I believe on the screen we have an example of Mississippi's. All of this is found on DRA's website. And then lastly, aligning with your WIOA state plan. How are you advancing all 3 plans? And I think it's really crucial to be able to do this in just a couple of sentences because of the 10-page limit. So just be aware that all of this is included in the statement of need and strategic alignment for 18 points. Moving on to the project description. Again, this is the heart and soul of your application. This is 30 points and it includes your project design, which is 20 points, as well as project partners. In your project design on the next slide, you have to detail all of your project activities and their implementation, connecting those to the needs and challenges that you mentioned in your statement of need and strategic alignment, meaning how is this project going to serve the needs and the challenges that you mentioned in that previous section? I have seen applications in the past that did not connect those two. And while I felt that the community probably had a very, very deep need, it didn't make sense and I couldn't connect it to their project design. So again, thinking about how you're able to write this project narrative in a way that is chronological, but also logical for an evaluator that's reviewing this and knows nothing about your community. Again, you'll need to mention what the skills gap is and maybe can go into a little bit more detail about those needs of local or regional employers in industry that would benefit from this program if they had trained individuals that were taking the jobs that might be available at their workplaces now. Perhaps it is training individuals within current employers that maybe can't advance in their careers without this additional training or any sort of on-the-job training or customized apprenticeship program that you might be able to create. Two very important things here is being able to connect the project activities that you're doing to both your project timeline as well as the budget narrative. Those are two documents that will be separate, but remember that an evaluator will be reading your project design. They'll be reading this project description. Then they will be cross-referencing that with your project timeline and budget narrative. It needs to make sense. For example, if you bring up the need for purchasing any sort of equipment or even supplies, which supplies is $5,000 or less, so say it's computers or iPads, and you don't talk about that in your project design, but we see that as an evaluator in your project or in your budget narrative, that's going to cause a lot of confusion for an evaluator. It won't be clear, even if it's clear to you. Remember, we know nothing about your community for all intensive purposes. Most of the folks reviewing these applications are nowhere near from the Delta. They're from all over the country. Please be aware of that. And then lastly, ensuring that you can implement project activities in a timely manner and achieve the outcomes and results that you propose. That is the outcomes section and the sustainability is in the next section, but I do want to give some sort of warning or advice here that what you describe in your project design should really impact the outcomes, outputs, and sustainability section of your project narrative. Please be realistic, because evaluators do consider that as they're reviewing these. Lastly, while I'm hopeful that this is less problematic in the coming year or coming 3 years of implementation of these new work grants, please mention even briefly a contingency plan for COVID-19 or anything similar that would require your program to pivot in any way. The next component in this section is project partners. Again, your two employers or industry partners that demonstrate significant engagement and also a need for skilled workers is important. It will be demonstrated by letters of commitment and or engagement, which is a requirement of this program. And also the public workforce system partner is a required project partner. But if you were listening to everything that Kagan was saying about their program, it took a village to get that program implemented. They had a lot of different partners, whether it be private employers, the community college, the city. There were a lot of people there helping make that happen. Be aware of the significance of the partners that you're including in your application. Be selective as well. Evaluators really want to be able to connect the dots to significant partners in your program. You will need to include the name of each partner, the type of entity they are, as well as any sort of committed resources in alignment with your program. That doesn't have to be financial commitment. It might be providing mentorship opportunities or internship opportunities to trainees. It could be a lot of different things. It could be financial, but just want to throw that out there. Describe your partner's role. This isn't a place in an application where you just list a ton of organizations. You really need to be thoughtful and intentional about what that partner is going to be doing. As well as the project sustainability. And that includes any sort of long-term commitment or engagement that that partner is going to provide. So beyond the industry partners and the public workforce system partners, again, be selective about who you're including in this section. Be very intentional about it. The next section is project results and sustainability. And again, this has changed from the first two rounds of work. We have expected results, which is going to be worth 10 points. Long-term benefits, also worth 10 points. And then lastly, what is unique to this year's FOA is achieving the work initiative goal, which we brought up earlier in the in the slide deck. This is where you bring it all together and describe how your program is going to ultimately achieve that goal throughout the program and upon completion and beyond. The one requirement here in this section is that you must include the number of participants that either obtain new or improved employment outcomes, as well as the total number of participants expected to be served in the grant period. Make sure these are consistent and logical. For example, don't say that there are more people that are obtaining new or improved employment than there are participants participating in your program. For your expected results, this is a table that Department of Labor includes in the FOA. Take a look at this, reference it. You can use either outcomes or outputs this year. You do have to use the outcomes that I just mentioned, but they're not going to have you separate these out like they have in years past because too many people or too many applicants were confusing those or mixing them up. So please be cognizant of the expected results that you're putting in. Describe what the activity is, what is going to be the outcome or output of that activity. For the long-term benefits, again, another 10 points. These are less measurable, if you will, but they're really describing what the economic impacts of your project will be if you are to be funded. So here an example, and this is included in the FOA, is increased tax revenue generated by counties or towns as a result of job creation and or employment obtained by workers and trainees. Again, be realistic here, be specific. This is just the long-term benefits to establish the sustainability of your program as well as the economic impacts that it will have after the grant period ends. Achieving the work initiative goal is, again, that new component this year. That is 10 points. This is where we bring it all together. As a reminder, the work goal is to create economic prosperity, gainful employment, and high quality career outcomes for workers in the ARC or DRA regions, enabling them to remain and thrive in these communities. Try to be concise. Sum up your program and how it supports and advances this goal beyond the life of the project. One of the last sections, organizational, administrative, and fiscal capacity, is worth 10 points. And there are two pieces to this, and Kagan touched on it during his presentation too. That is the financial and management documentation to demonstrate organizational and fiscal capacity. And if you are looking at the FOA, you can reference page 27, and it mentions that you should complete one of the following. The financial system assessment form, which is included in the FOA, the applicant's most recent audited financial report, or your IRS Form 990. One of those three must be submitted in order to get those 5 points. You also need to submit resumes, or if you're hiring as a result of receiving the grant funds, job descriptions to demonstrate the administrative capacity to carry out this grant program. I will mention too that I'm seeing several questions come through. I will address those at the end. I know that we are running a few minutes over. We are just about done. I will answer those questions. The last section is the budget and budget narrative. The budget, as I mentioned, is the SF 424A form. Most of you, if you've submitted grants in the past, are familiar with both the SF 424 and the SF 424A. Those are your only two mandatory government forms that you must submit with your application package. Your budget narrative needs to detail every single line item. So every amount that you put in personnel, fringe benefits, travel, equipment, supplies, contractual, other or indirect costs must be justified in your budget narrative. That does not count towards your 10-page project narrative page allowance, so just be aware of that. You'll see construction is underlined and has asterisks next to it. That is because that section must be 0. Even if you are doing any sort of capital improvements, please include that under contractual. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into every single category and what that means. Please reference the funding opportunity for each of those sections. As we mentioned already, these are the only 2 mandatory forms that you'll need to fill out and attach to your proposal. Now, the requested attachments to the project narrative, some of these are most of these are required. I will mention the abstract is not required. I think you should do it. It provides you another opportunity to provide any sort of insight into your program for the evaluators, but just want to make sure you all know that you will not be ruled out if you don't have that. You will need the designation of the ARC or DRA region. Again, that includes the area, so it can just be a statement, plus the map of your region that you'll be focusing on, that is required. Your abstract, which includes the essentially the executive summary of your project, what is in the application. They specify this on page 28 and 29, so please reference that in the FOA when you can. The project timeline, again, this must be according to your project narrative, so please make sure that it is chronological and makes sense to the evaluator. You also need to have the evidence of your required partnerships, which are your employers, as well as your public workforce system partner. If you have any other letters of engagement to demonstrate partnerships, that is where this can be included as well, but they are not required beyond the employers and public workforce system partner. If you have a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, that is where you would include this as an attachment to the project narrative. Key staff resumes or those job descriptions that we just spoke about would also be attached. And then lastly, your financial system assessment information, whether it is that form, the IRS 990, or your most recent audit. For reference later, this is what the designation of either the DRA or ARC region attachment should look like. So you'll say that the proposed project will take place in which region, and then what the area is to be served. You can see here, we just pointed to Cape Girardeau County. Please make sure you do something similar when you submit your attachment. This is for the abstract. This is detailed again on page 28 and 29 in the FOA. I'm not going to go into detail of this. It's pretty specific in the FOA, and also is just a high level executive summary of your project. As a reminder, you must include all of the information that we discussed previously for the application screening criteria to be eligible for this program and for your application to be reviewed. Failure to do this will result in your application not being reviewed. All of these applications are reviewed by a panel of typically 3 panelists, while DRA and sometimes ARC participate on the review panels. Again, you can expect panelists to be from all over the country that Department of Labor works with. They may or may not be familiar with your community, so please keep that in mind. The total number of grants that will be awarded will depend on the number that is received. That number has grown from work 1 to work 2 because of the funding range. So we will not know until awards are made. If you have questions specific to the funding opportunity announcement, those questions need to go to the Department of Labor. We've worked with Jennifer the last couple of years. She is fantastic. She'll be able to answer your questions. That's her email and her phone number. If you want to talk through your projects, please reach out to us at DRA. We have Ari's name listed up there. The workforce email is workforce@dra.gov. I apologize for the lengthy presentation, but now I'm going to get to some questions and answers. If you need to hop off, feel free to do that. I'll try to get to all of your questions today. If not, please reach out to workforce@dra.gov or directly to Ari Kanglos. We'll make sure to get these questions answered. So I will start with the Q&A questions that I'm seeing. The first is, if we want to include equipment, do we need approval from the grant officer before submitting, or only if it's funded before purchase? So if you are doing any capital improvements or purchasing equipment, if that equipment is that piece of equipment is $5,000 or more, you will need prior approval before doing anything. So even when your grant is awarded, you will then need to submit for prior approval from the grant officer. So I would recommend, if you are awarded, to do that immediately. It does take them some time to approve that. Does including equipment make us less competitive? No, not at all. And I will say, talking about capital improvements and equipment, if, for example, that is all you're asking for, and frankly, that was the case with Kagan and Everest. They applied for their HVAC system in the new facility. If you are only talking about the actual improvement and not providing the full narrative for why your project is going to be impactful, that would be the only way that that could hurt you. Make sure you're able to tell the story of your program. There are some limitations with how much you can request. Generally, they're only going to approve applications for capital improvements and equipment that are not above 50%. You can request above 50%, but you will need prior approval from the grant officer. And if you give me a second, I will make sure I get you the page in the FOA where you can take a look at that piece, because that is different this year than in years past. They are going to try to provide some sort of flexibility with that, but it is a little bit different this year. There is some discussion about that on page 10 and 11, and it goes into page 12 as well. But on page 11, you'll see that generally work applicants should not propose that more than 50% of their project budget be allocated to allowable equipment purchases or renovations. Then it goes into saying, however, ... So there are exceptions that can and likely will be made if you have a compelling justification. I've seen a couple of questions about being in a rural area, and I do want to mention, since it is a little bit confusing with the name of the program, you don't have to be in an area that is considered rural by the federal government. This is both for urban and rural communities. It is important to justify the need for this program. And again, that goes back to the statement of need and documenting the challenges that your community might be facing. But this is open to both urban and rural communities, so long as you're serving eligible participants in either the DRA or ARC regions. Somebody asked if they could apply as an LLC if they're located in the region and have their DUNS SAM.gov registration and are on grants.gov. You cannot apply for this if you are a for-profit. You would have to partner with another organization and perhaps be that private sector partner that is included. And I don't know the business that you are in, but for-profit businesses cannot apply. And lastly, I'm just going to check the chat to make sure I didn't miss anything, unless Susan, you can let me know if I've missed anything.
One of the ones that was recurring was, do the local workforce boards need a SAM.gov registration?
No, just the applicant. So the primary applicant that is applying So unless the local workforce board is applying for the grant, they will not need to prove that.
Okay, another question came in. How does one get prior approval for renovation and purchasing equipment? I think you've already covered that, but if you want to re-emphasize.
Yeah, and that's a little bit confusing. So I'll just clarify that. So once an organization is awarded, prior approval actually means that once you are awarded, you have to submit a budget modification. And that is essentially a justification for why you need to purchase your equipment or make those capital improvements, especially if it's above 50%. That it is limited to this year, but also if it is not. So then the grant officer will review that budget request. Again, this is after you're awarded. They'll review that budget request and they will then give you the notice to proceed to move forward.
Another question, if the local workforce board is one applying, do we still have to require partnership with a workforce partner, or would the two employers suffice?
That's actually a great question for the Department of Labor. I haven't heard that question just yet. So please reach out to Jennifer. Her information is also in the FOA, obviously in the slide deck that will be provided to you. But I believe her information is on page 49. Shoot her an email. Great question.
And one final question, can we apply as a resource center?
I would need to know a little more information. So Melvin, if you could reach out to us at workforce@dra.gov and we can have either a conversation by email or by phone, we'll be able to answer that question for you.
And there was a final question for Kagan. Does the training being offered through the program translate to any specific industry certifications?
I don't know if Kagan is.
We might have to.
Kagan. I don't know that he's still on. If you send us that question, we can get that answered. I do know a big component of his program is making sure that those folks are trained within 12 months. I don't know if they have specific certifications that they have then met, but I do know that they meet the qualifications of the employers that are then hiring them or interviewing them. So good question. Please send us an email and we'll ask Kagan.
Okay. One final question. If an institution does not have a current indirect cost agreement, what percentage does one use for this cost?
You will need to use the de minimis, which is 10%. There is specific guidance on how to use or how to come up with your cost allocation. And I'm just saying if I can find it here in the FOA, but it is on page 33. 33 will give you some more information if you don't have a NICRA. They provide you with some guidance on how to use the de minimis.
And that is all of the questions on chat and Q&A.
Great. Well, thank you everyone again for joining us today. I apologize we went over our time here. We wanted to make sure we provided you with as much information as possible. If you're in the area and want some more guidance on this program, please join us at our workshop on Friday in Monroe, Louisiana. We will be on the campus of ULM. If you have any other questions that are project specific, please reach out to us at workforce@dra.gov. And any questions related to the FOA, again, please reach out to Jennifer at the Department of Labor. Her information is in the slide deck and is in the funding opportunity announcement. I appreciate it, and we will let you go. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.